Hello, everyone, and thank you for tuning in to the Mother Runners podcast. So I have with me Dr. Sarah, the hip doc, as she's known on Instagram, and she and I were actually talking about something else because she's writing a book. Yay.
Yeah.
Which is super exciting. And so I was like, okay, let's take the opportunity to piggyback off this conversation and talk about hip health, specifically for mother runners. Um, Before we get into that, do you mind, because I remember this from our podcast interview, sharing the brief background as to how you decided to focus on hip health?
Yeah, totally. So I went to physical therapy school. I became a just regular outpatient orthopedic physical therapist, did my residency and fellowship. And in that process, I kept coming across women runners, specifically like mother runners, like ages 25 to like 45, which you can be a mom older than that too as well. But I was like, oh my gosh, these runners are being so underserved in the clinic. Like we're hitting like return to run, but we're not serving them beyond that. And I also subsequently had a ton of women that were coming in with labral tears or just hip pain, and they had no idea what to do. The medical system was like throwing them around. And I was like, dang, I really feel like this is where I'm supposed to be. I went through my own hip injury, and I was like, I think there would be a abundant and flourishing practice if I just stepped out and did this full time. And that's all I saw.
I love that. Well, and thank goodness you're here because so many of us have hip issues, of course, me included. And I have people on Instagram who message me, and I get so frustrated with the standard of care that they're experiencing. One second, the Roomba just came in here, so let me turn it off. I'm sitting right next to the dock, and it's so funny because I just ran into my dog, and she's just like not moving.
She's like, what is this thing?
Everybody gets annoyed with me when I try to have a clean house, including the dogs. Okay, so we were chatting before we started recording. What are some things that that mother runners can do, because we are at like a greater risk for, actually, let's start there. We are at a greater risk, right, for hip injuries, especially if you've been pregnant and had a baby.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I will say, I believe the statistics are a little bit heavier that women are more prone to labral tears, or just hip injuries in general. We don't have to say labral tears, but hip injuries. And then we tend to be more mobile. So then there's just more things going on, more things you have to control. And
When
it's
when
just
you say more mobile, you mean like we're moving around a lot, or our joints are more mobile?
our joints are more mobile.
Okay, because we
Yes.
do move around a lot.
You also move around a lot. You have to carry your children, pick them up out of these weird positions. There's
Yes.
a lot you can't control.
Yes. Okay. So what are some things with given that, and then obviously running, I mean, running's problematic because it's a repetitive sport, it's a high impact sport. And so I always feel like if you have like a little kink in the system, it's just magnified over time because you just keep, pounding the pavement, and then that puts you at risk for injury. So what are, I don't know, maybe, well, you can tell me, but maybe like three exercises that mother runners can weave into their strength training routine to bulletproof them against hip injuries.
Totally, totally. So this is really my best kept, not really because I say it a lot, but secret of strength training. I think for runners specifically, I mean, it's hard to fit strength training in. So if you can just do like the three best things, then that's just the most efficient way to go about
Right.
it.
Yeah. So we're all about efficiency.
Yes, but I love creating all of my training programs in the three different planes of motion. So you want to have a motion that is moving forwards and backwards. So something like a forward lunge, a backwards lunge, just something super simple like that. And then I also love programming stuff in like the frontal plane of motion. So that's like where you're moving side to side. So now you're attacking different muscles that we're not necessarily getting in running. So that could be something like a lateral lunge, or like a monster walk, or just something where you're moving side to side. And then the last one is rotational. So something where you're training the hip as you're like rotating over it. This is like hip airplane, or if
What
you
does
think like
that look like?
Yeah, a hip airplane is where you are like going forward into like a forward T. So your body almost looks like a airplane or like a T, or an airplane. And then from there, you're like rotating your body over your leg.
Okay, so you have one leg out behind you and both arms out, and then you're rotating so that your trunk is then kind of like facing a wall or something.
Totally,
Okay, and
totally.
I interrupted you. You had another one, I think, for rotational.
Oh yeah. Another one I think is a little bit easier to visualize is like a basketball pivot. So if you imagine that you're like on guard, ready to like guard someone while you're playing basketball, one foot is down and then the other foot is like pivoting out as they're like maybe trying to pass you, and then you're pivoting back forward so you're like ready to guard them again. So you're rotating over one leg.
You totally just brought me back to 5th grade.
Yeah.
I have not played basketball, I think, really since 5th grade, and like remembering practicing that in practice. Thank you for that. I
So
thought
welcome.
about that. I can like smell the gym. Okay, that's great. And then so with those, I would imagine the rotational you don't have weight, but with the other ones you can add weight if you'd like.
Yeah, totally. Just depending on, I mean, dosage is super important and it's relative to everyone. But I would say a really easy blanket statement is like 3 sets of 8 to 12, where you're like working 7 out of 10 intensity, is a great dosage for runners.
And so people should they sprinkle them in just like once a week or twice a week?
Yeah. Also depending on like your running volume and what you have time for and your relative stress. Um, Minimum once a week. If you're in a really high peak volume season, it's okay to have 0 times a week. But we should be aiming for at least once a week, if
Okay.
not more.
Wonderful. Well, that was super helpful. Thank you for making it easy. I always like it to be easy. And so when we're thinking about our strength training, we just need to think of 3 exercises in the frontal plane. What's the what are rotational?
Sagittal, so forwards and
Sagittal, that's right.
backwards.
Yeah.
And then transverse is rotational.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Sarah.
You are so welcome.
Okay, that was